Peter B. Collins with another post-retirement news and comment special. It's Friday, January 22nd, 2021. And way back last year when I announced that I would retire at the end of 2020, I did agree to try to complete the election cycle. Never did I imagine it would take until Inauguration Day to get there. So in my last post-retirement special, we talked about the events of January 6th, which will come up a bit later here today. And I do want to talk about the inauguration, about Trump's exit, and a lot of news that has happened in the last couple of weeks. And, of course, we were all relieved that Trump exited Washington, D.C. He held his own little farewell party at Andrews Air Force Base, gave a bit of a farewell speech, which was largely ignored in the corporate media. Then he flew to Florida at our expense, and, you know, that's typical. Presidents do get a final ride on Air Force One. And he and Melania stepped off the plane and into retirement. We'll talk about the final weeks of Trump, the shit show that he put on. But let's begin at the inauguration this past Wednesday. With 25,000 troops deployed to secure the Capitol, it was a relief but not a surprise that Joe Biden survived his own inauguration. And was not alone in fearing that some Trumper of some sort, a Proud Boy, a 3%er, might find a way to attempt to take him out. So the departure of Trump, the relative safe process of the inauguration, I think comes as a relief. And for most of us, just not having to face Trump's daily surprises, his insults, attacks, and the whole routine that he put on of chaos over 4 years. Well, people, they're sleeping better. There is a lightness in the air, and it's something that we should all savor and enjoy. And Joe Biden, I think, gave a speech that was excellent for Joe Biden. He's not the greatest orator. And the good parts were that he was direct with the American people. He didn't soft pedal the pandemic or its implications on the economy and on the lives of so many Americans, whether the impact is on their health or on their ability to work and earn a living. And he came across as a man of compassion. The optics of the night before, the reflecting pool with the, 4,000, I guess, lights that lit up in honor of the 400,000 whose deaths are attributed to COVID-19. It struck such a different tone. And Biden doesn't grandstand in ways that it's all about him. He does show a certain sense of humility. And in the speech, his call for unity was something that resonates with people who are not part of the, the Trump rear guard. But it also rings hollow and almost fanciful. Because in order to unify, you have to have willing parties on all sides. And that simply is not the case in the U.S. today. And the lingering effects of Trump will be with us for a long time. And frankly, I wish that Biden had put some guardrails around his call for unity. Because unity can't come at the expense of leadership at this very critical time, a time of crisis. And compromise is not a dirty word, but the way it's defined in the Republican lexicon is you give 100% and they take 100%. And capitulation has to be ruled out. We saw the sorry effort, first by Democrats, then it was joined way too late by Trump in a grandstanding manner, to pump out checks of $2,000 It would help Americans pay their rent. It would help landlords collect some rent and pay their bills. And it simply would provide a needed cushion for many Americans at this time. And we heard the Republicans say, well, it's not targeted enough. Well, it's targeted to individuals with incomes under $75,000, households under $150,000. And the way we did it in the spring by juicing up unemployment benefits is the most reliable way to get it to people who were working and are not because of the pandemic. And so those were empty words that were used by the wealthy, mostly male Republican members of the Senate to rationalize their just flat-out stinginess and their lack of compassion for the people on the verge of eviction who run out of money at the end of the month to pay for food and who wonder where the money for next month's rent is going to come from. And just as a footnote to that, here in California today, it's reported that 1.5 million people have not paid their water bills in recent months. It's a hit on water agencies of over $1 billion. And they're betting that their water won't be turned off. But they can't afford to pay that bill because they have to pay the rent or the utilities. And so Biden did strike a tone of identifying with the people who are hurting. He also was fairly blunt in talking about the attack on the Capitol that occurred exactly 2 weeks before his inauguration. And I'll get into that in a little bit. And he took on Trump's lies, the alternate media that was creating false reports, fake news, whether it was about the so-called rigged election, the China virus, or many other topics. But David Sirota, over at the Daily Poster, I've linked to his commentary here, quoted Biden, "There's truth and there are lies, lies told for power and for profit. And each of us has a duty and a responsibility as citizens, as Americans, and especially as leaders who have pledged to honor our Constitution and protect our nation, to defend the truth and defeat the lies." And Sirota continues, "Trump was the obvious target of this diss, and he surely deserves it. Trump is a pathological liar who seemed to enjoy lying even when there was no reason to do so. With the help of right-wing media, he weaponized the White House megaphone, and let's not forget Twitter, that's my addition here, to depict fantastical fabrications as inherent truth to the point where large swaths of the country believe demonstrably untrue statements are indisputable facts. Trump was defeated by an opponent who may not be a pathological liar, but who serially lies. Biden not only promoted the lies that led America into the Iraq War, was not only part of an administration that let Wall Street off the hook for its fraud, he also recently repeatedly lied about his public record and promises throughout the Democratic primary on Social Security cuts, on the bankruptcy bill that he authored that made an arch enemy of Elizabeth Warren. And so it's important to note that many of our elected leaders have a loose connection with the truth. Trump was clearly off the deep end. Obama mostly lied through omission. He just didn't admit that we were running covert operations in Syria, or that lies were used to justify our involvement in Libya and the takedown of Muammar Gaddafi. Or you can keep your doctor. That was not an omission. So what we have, in my view, is many good things coming from the booting of Trump. There's going to be a return to regular order. And while I think that many of Trump's cabinet-level picks are awful, they're all professionals. And Biden is following the rules to have his cabinet members confirmed by the Senate, not just a stack of acting secretary of this or acting secretary of that, which gave Trump more leverage over them, and also, I believe, was some insulation against the triggering of the 25th Amendment. And Trump appointed a wrecking crew. Biden has one real stinker in there, that's Tom Vilsack returning for an encore as Secretary of Agriculture, and he's the guy with ugly ties to Monsanto. But overall, what we have is a more stable approach to our government system. And as I say, people who have experience, even if much of that experience includes bad judgment. And on his first day, Biden announced some things that made me smile. He's killing the permit for the Keystone XL pipeline. Nice going, Joe. He also, of course, made announcements regarding a new package of immigration laws that would allow the undocumented to remain in this country on a path to citizenship. He extended the protection for the so-called Dreamers under DACA. And he did what he could to neutralize some of the executive orders that Trump had issued and some of the administrative moves to deregulate industries that were the hallmark of the Trump administration. And let me just linger on this one. It's buried in an article about the now confirmed Secretary of Defense, the retired General Lloyd Austin III, because he told his confirmation committee in the Senate that the administration does not intend to bring new detainees to Guantanamo and will seek to close it. Now, in one of my last interviews before I tried to retire in December, and I have retired, okay, with Andy Worthington, who's the keeper of the log of Gitmo, Joe Biden didn't take any position on this during the campaign because it is contentious even with members of his own party. That may have been wise. But I was surprised and pleased to read that the administration would like to close Guantanamo, and it's probably best to approach that in a less dramatic way. After all, Obama proclaimed that he would close it on day one of his administration, and he was not able to achieve it in 8 long years. Now, one of the stinky signals that came from the foreign policy and intelligence crew of the new administration was the invitation to Carlos Vecchio, a former Exxon lawyer who currently serves as the interim ambassador for the non-existent Juan Guaido government in Venezuela. He was invited to the inauguration. And Chloe is very upset about that. She wants to see a change in policy toward Venezuela, and she and I are in full agreement about that. But this shows continuity with the Trump administration, and it will not be the only example. On another front, I don't typically give a new administration a honeymoon, but I do wait for complete proposals to land or to be presented. And there's been some sniping at Biden over the last couple of weeks over whether the full $2,000 that Democrats wanted to give to Americans, or many Americans, before Christmas would actually be paid. And one of the new proposals in the $1.9 trillion Biden package is to write checks for an additional $1,400, which would get you to a total of the $2,000 that had been proposed. And some people are sniping at that as backpedaling. Now, I'll wait to see what the legislation actually reads before I decide whether I support it or not. But one element that is in Biden's package was presented in the Senate yesterday. Senior Democratic lawmakers are proposing an expansion of the child tax credit that would not just be refundable, but would be paid to identified families on a quarterly basis. Then at the end of the tax year, when they file their 1040s, they would either, just claim that credit, or in some cases, they might have to pay a little tax on it if they ended up earning more that put them up above the threshold. But this is a proposal that I support. It's quite progressive. It's not something I expected from Joe Biden coming out of the gate. So a number of people have emailed, and I'll single out John Zwiebel in Hawaii, and asked for my comments on Joe Biden's cabinet picks. And I'll just run down the list here and give you some quick, kind of off the top of my bald head comments. He named Merrick Garland, the man who was appointed to the Supreme Court by Obama, who never got a hearing because of the blatant power play by Mitch McConnell. He has appointed him as Attorney General. And I'm not excited about this, but I think I understand Biden's rationale. And that is that Garland does have bipartisan support. He's a moderate guy. He's a former prosecutor. And he is basically given the job to repair the damage that Bill Barr and Jeff Sessions did during the Trump years. And so the extent to which restoration of the Justice Department is the goal there, Garland is a decent pick. The challenge will be what happens when the Hunter Biden case comes up, and what happens if and when the John Durham report about the investigation into the investigation of Russiagate originated. And I'll have more comments about that coming up here shortly. At any rate, to me, Garland, I feel kind of neutral about that. He's likely to be confirmed, and he may just be a kind of bland bureaucrat who will not excite us, but who also will not be part of brazen efforts to violate the Constitution. Tony Blinken, Secretary of State, is one of the worst picks, together with Neera Tanden and Victoria Nuland of the incoming Biden team. He, of course, is a longtime advisor to Biden back to the days in the Senate and Foreign Relations Committee. He joined Biden in promoting the U.S. invasion of Iraq back in 2002, 2003. Now, on the positive side, he supported the Paris Climate Accords and was a participant in the development of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. And I believe that he will be engineering some sort of new process with Iran to restore that nuclear agreement. So on balance, if he learned from his hawkish policies in the past, including support for the covert war in Syria, where we had no business, and the debacle in Libya, well, I'm trying to put some positive spin on it, and I'll stop there. Because Tony Blinken told his Senate confirmation panel that he agrees with Trump on the confrontation with China. He hastened to add that he wouldn't have used the tariffs and other maneuvers, but he kind of split that baby. He also said that he supports the move of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, which I, of course, am bitterly opposed to. And it's interesting. Israel greeted the new administration by announcing more illegal settlements on Palestinian land. And Biden has not piped up about that, but he has opposed it in the past, expansionism. And so it remains to be seen how much he will modulate U.S. relations with the corrupt and extreme Netanyahu government in Israel. They've already confirmed the first black Secretary of Defense, and his color is being used to get us to distract us, in my view, from the history of Lloyd Austin III. Now, he got a waiver, and I'm not totally opposed to that, but I'm tired of these retired generals being brought in to run the Pentagon. The clear intention of the job is a civilian should run the Pentagon. And Austin says that he'll recruit a lot of civilians at the second level, but that's not news either. So he ran CENTCOM. He ran the war against ISIS. And the one thing that is obscured, and I've read carefully the articles about his confirmation hearings and his biography, the corporate media doesn't mention that since he retired, Lloyd Austin has been on the board of Raytheon, the behemoth defense contractor. There's more continuity with Trump. His last real Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, was on loan from Raytheon, where he'd been an executive and a lobbyist. And this unholy connection between the vendors to the Pentagon and the leadership at the Pentagon is something that is truly problematic. Then we have Janet Yellen. Not a surprise. She's likely to be confirmed easily as Secretary of the Treasury. And somebody should make a stink about the Hillary maneuvers that she made while she was out of office. She raked in more than $7 million giving speeches to giant Wall Street firms that she now is going to be regulating, including Citibank, nearly $1 million from them. And she's a moderate economist. I don't consider her to be evil, but she has a real corporate orientation. And I imagine that she will continue the huge support for Wall Street and industry that has propped up the stock market, despite the underlying conditions that don't drive the climb in stock prices that we've seen, even in this very disruptive year, the past year of 2020. Alejandro Mayorkas, Cuban-born, served in the Obama administration at Homeland Security. He joined the Department of Homeland Security in 2013, so we can only make him responsible for a portion of the 3 million deportations that occurred in the 8-year Obama administration. But he led the Office of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services from 2009 to 15, so he's been in that mix. And it remains to be seen how he will operate the department. I'm sure the optics will change, but there is a caravan moving north toward our southern border, and this is it's going to be an interesting test. Now, on day one, Obama take two. On day one, Biden announced that he was suspending construction of the southern border wall. I approve of that. But what other moves will he make? He's made good moves related to immigration regulation in the United States. And he lifted the Muslim travel ban. Those are all good things. But he's going to hit a buzzsaw, even among some Democrats, when it comes to any form of comprehensive immigration reform. One of the people I'm excited about, there are two cabinet picks that I am gung-ho about, and one is California's Attorney General Javier Becerra, who has been appointed to run Health and Human Services. Now, he's being targeted by the Republicans as too liberal. He does have a track record. He was a member of Congress before Gavin Newsom appointed him Attorney General in California when Kamala Harris vacated that seat to move to the United States Senate. I know Becerra a little bit. I've interviewed him several times. He has a great sense of humor, which always matters to me. But he's a very smart and focused guy. And he has a history of supporting Medicare for all. That doesn't mean he'll have his way and that Biden is going to change his opposition to M4A, but it speaks to the progressive credentials of Javier Becerra. And while I'm at it, the other person I'm really excited about is Deb Haaland. The name is spelled Haaland. She is a Native American from New Mexico in a second term in the House. And she's going to be the Secretary of Interior. And do you know what sub-cabinet department is in Interior? It's the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the ugliest agency that has carried out racist policies, supported the extermination in the past and the marginalization in the present of Native Americans. And this is not just a token nomination, because if it were token, she'd be a treasurer or secretary of something else. But this is an appointment where she will have real authority. And it goes beyond the identity politics that often leave me underwhelmed. Now, I don't know much about Miguel Cardona. It's another identity politics appointment. He's currently the education commissioner in Connecticut. He's been appointed to replace Betsy DeVos at the U.S. Department of Education. He is a union guy, former member of the American Federation of Teachers, and I'm sympathetic to unions, even though there are, I understand, some positions that they take that people oppose. So I'll stay neutral on him until we have more information. I already mentioned Tommy Vilsack over there at Agriculture. That's one of the really bad picks of Joe Biden for his cabinet. Former Michigan Governor Jennifer Granholm is the nominee for the Secretary of Energy job. And while she brings green and climate change credentials to that job, we have to keep in mind that the Department of Energy is really just an adjunct of the Pentagon. The nuclear industries, the nuclear weapons process and development, manufacturing, those are all rolled up under the Department of Energy. And so when it comes to domestic politics and gas, oil, fracking, that's a very small slice of the portfolio of the Secretary of Energy. Trump gave a kind of a second prize to Ohio Democratic Congresswoman Marcia Fudge, an African-American. She wanted to be the Secretary of Agriculture because of the food stamp program that is a central part to it. And Biden instead went with his old buddy Vilsack and gave her the runner-up prize, making her the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development and making her the boss of one of my brothers. Pete Buttigieg, Secretary of Transportation. Show us what you can do there, Pete. I'm open-minded. I found Pete to be way too moderate, actually conservative, as he presented himself in the campaign. In identity politics, I'm happy to see a married man be named to a cabinet post. But it remains to be proved what Pete Buttigieg can do. And transportation is a place where, I don't know, I think it's hard to screw things up too badly. This is a political payoff. Secretary of Veterans Affairs is a man who never wore a uniform. His name is Dennis McDonough. He was Biden's, actually Obama's chief of staff from 2013 to 2017. He, again, is a competent professional, and VA needs a competent professional. But will he be able to connect with the rank and file of Americans' veterans communities? I don't know much about Marty Walsh, the Democratic mayor of Boston, named to lead the Labor Department. Bernie Sanders appeared to be angling for that job, and I'm glad he didn't get it. I think Bernie's going to be much more effective in the Senate than he would as a wallflower in the Biden cabinet. Oh, and then there's Gina Raimundo. She is the Democratic conservative governor of Rhode Island. She is a former venture capitalist who worked at a firm aligned with Bain Capital. That's, remember, Mitt Romney's old company that buys, dismantles companies as they charge them fat fees and extract whatever they can from the carcass. She also started her own venture capital firm, and so Secretary of Commerce. Good luck, Gina. So let me share briefly some quick comments from John Zwiebel, who gave us his list on Merrick Garland, moderate opposition, too centrist. I don't believe he'll investigate Hunter. Tony Blinken, he strongly opposes. General Austin, he opposes. Secretary Yellen, neutral to oppose because of her paid speeches. Mayorkas, he opposes. Sounds like a crook, he says. Okay. I don't know that much about him, really. He supports Becerra. He opposes Cardona. That's the Secretary of Education. He is pleased with the Holland nomination. He says he's neutral about Vilsack. Look a little deeper there, John, and I think you'll shift to opposition. He opposes Granholm because she's on CNN. I actually think she's a paid contributor at MSNBC, but I don't keep track of all that. He supports Fudge. He opposes Buttigieg. He is neutral on McDonough and on Walsh, and he opposes Raimundo. In these first 2 days, the Biden team is sending mixed and troubling signals about their policies and attitudes toward Russia. And it's complicated, there's no question about it. But it is also driven by the legacy of Russiagate and the desire by Democrats to continue to blame Russia for the election of Trump and the failures of Hillary Clinton. We'll have more on that in just a second here. But the Biden administration is working on two tracks. One, trying to get Putin to agree to a 5-year extension of the only remaining treaty limiting the nuclear arsenals, and it's set to expire in just a few days. And a senior U.S. official told the Washington Post, as we work with Russia, we will work to hold Russia accountable for their reckless and aggressive actions. Now, one of the unknowns here is what extent is Russia responsible, if at all, for the so-called hack, the SolarWinds software hack, that has been widely reported with great consternation, the wringing of hands, but we don't have a single indication that there has been a negative impact from the SolarWinds software breach. And we don't have any public evidence that Russia is involved. We only have the same lame assessments and representations and beliefs that come from unaccountable and unnamed intelligence sources. Now, to its credit, the administration says that it wants to investigate the SolarWinds software breach, the hacking that's been reported. But at the same time, they are kind of renewing the threads of Russiagate, and they are referring to the alleged reports of Russians paying bounties to Taliban fighters in Afghanistan to kill American soldiers. And that is a pure concoction. We know that. And to see them breathing it new life at this late stage, I think, is pretty pathetic. But it was on somebody's to-do list, and so they will do to it. Also, speaking of Russiagate, Donald Trump, in his final hours in the White House, made an announcement that he had formally ordered the FBI director and others to get out of the way and declassify what John Solomon, the Trump-aligned Russiagate investigative reporter, says is a trove of documents, a binder more than a foot high. And he was on with Sean Hannity on the night before the inauguration, Trump's last night in the White House, saying that he expected this declassification and disclosure to go forward. Now, these documents are believed to be related to the investigation of John Durham, who Trump and Bill Barr appointed to investigate the investigation. And I discussed that at great length over the past year or so, that I believe there is quite a bit to be revealed. But I don't trust Bill Barr or John Durham to do so in a nonpartisan way. That concern remains, but after Trump made that announcement, there were moves by the FBI director and the top dogs in the Democratic leadership on Capitol Hill to block the move. And Hannity said that John Solomon was going to be back on, and so far that has not occurred. And it appears, based on just internet searches, that the documents have not been released. One of them that Solomon says he reviewed was an interview by the FBI of Christopher Steele, who told the FBI that in the fall of 2016, he had a choice. He could either continue to work for the Clinton campaign and promote the dossier and the kind of sketchy information that he collected there, instead of cooperating with the FBI to proceed with their investigation. So that's the only tidbit that I have on what may be in this binder that's a foot high that we may never see. And I have to ask Trump, why the hell did you wait until the very end to release this stuff? You could have declassified it years ago. And as I have explained, Russiagate is at the basis of the credibility of some of Trump's attacks on the media, the fake news claims. And it also has undermined the credibility of the corporate media in this country that went headlong into it and has never apologized, never retracted a single bit. And Ben Smith was the editor of BuzzFeed who released the Steele dossier. He now writes for the New York Times, and in an article about the Fox News settlement with the family of Seth Rich, he reintroduced and affirmed all of the false claims about Russiagate, without mentioning that Sean Henry of CrowdStrike explicitly testified under oath that he had no evidence of exfiltration of documents from the DNC. And on that note, I want to recommend Joe Laria's latest piece at consortiumnews.com. A couple of quotes. Russiagate was an invention to help explain away Hillary Clinton's defeat in 2016 and to undermine the legitimacy of the man who beat her. Now that that man himself has been defeated and a Democrat is back in the White House, one would think it was over. But Russiagate has proved too useful an instrument to discard. It beat up not only Donald Trump, but riled Russia, too. It was an elixir for CNN's and MSNBC's ratings. Oh, and this is so discouraging. He continues, last Friday, Clinton invited Nancy Pelosi onto her podcast to discuss the events at the Capitol. In the middle of it, Clinton revealed the power she has behind the scenes. She said, "We learned a lot about our system of government over the last 4 years with a president who disdains democracy and has other agendas. What they all are, I don't think we yet know. I hope historically we'll find out who he's beholden to, who pulls his strings." And then Hillary went on, "I would love to see his phone records to see whether he was talking to Putin the day that the insurgents invaded our capital." Really? And her basis for that far-fetched speculation? We now know that not just him, but his enablers, his accomplices, his cult members have the same disregard for democracy. So this is jaw-dropping. And when she asked Pelosi if there should be a 9/11 type commission to investigate and report everything that they can pull together, Pelosi responded, "I do support it." Well, come on. We had the limited hangout Mueller investigation. We have the sworn testimony of Sean Henry. And they want to perpetuate the myth of Russiagate? Later in the piece, Laria says, repeatedly blaming Russia allows Democrats to deny the role they have played in the devastation of working and formerly middle-class Americans, which helped elect Trump and fueled the assault at the Capitol. And he cites Sean Henry's testimony as well. So we have some propaganda wars as part of the new battle lines being drawn between Washington and Moscow. Starting in Moscow, Putin signed a law on December 30th, which makes violation of rules that the U.S. propaganda arms Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty must define themselves and their material as the product of a foreign agent. Well, enforcement now includes up to 2 years in prison for the individuals found to have violated that law. Now, this is a payback for the Trump administration. It actually happened around Trump. But RT, the American media outlet controlled by Moscow, has to designate itself as a foreign agent. And we've seen on Facebook where anybody who posts a clip from RT or an article from RT sees it flagged with, this is from a foreign government. And when Chris Hedges hosts his show, which is aired on RT, he gets the same label, and Chris Hedges is a man who I know enough not to be an agent of a foreign government, specifically Moscow. So here in the U.S. at the propaganda agency, the U.S. Agency for Global Media, where you got your Radio Free Europe, your Radio Liberty, your Middle East Broadcasting, Radio Marti, Radio Free Asia. Well, Trump had installed Michael Pack, who was turning the U.S. propaganda arm into a Trump propaganda arm. So Biden removed Michael Pack just hours after he was inaugurated, and he put in place a longtime VOA, Voice of America employee, a journalist named Keilu Chao. And Chao had filed a whistleblower lawsuit against Pack a few months ago after Pack suspended 6 senior executives and sought their removal. So he is dedicated to the mission of our propaganda agency, but not to the president as an individual. Is that progress? You decide. So I do support the impeachment, and I support a Senate conviction of Donald Trump for inciting the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. And as I'll cite in a moment, there are some voices on the left who they blow my mind as they try to rewrite what occurred. But Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker, today announced that she will transmit the article of impeachment next Monday to the Senate. Now, the Senate is required to take it up immediately, but under the Senate rules, they can also essentially receive the articles and then schedule the trial. And there is an effort by both Republicans to delay the trial as a way to make it go away, and Democrats to delay the trial so that they can finish the confirmation of Biden's cabinet and work on the $1.9 trillion COVID relief package. And so there are, I think, some rational arguments. But fundamentally, this is an issue that won't go away. The Republicans are now saying flatly that it's unconstitutional to try and convict an ex-president. I don't believe that's true. No former president has been tried in this manner, but there are several lower-ranking officials who were tried after they had resigned from office in an effort to avoid impeachment. So there's going to be a lot of fighting about that. And because the Senate is evenly split at 50-50 with Vice President Harris casting tie-breaking votes when necessary, you're going to see committees chaired by Democrats, but the committees will have an even number of Democrats and Republicans, meaning that party line votes, well, they can be a stalemate. So they haven't organized the committees and the rules, whether there's going to be a filibuster in this session. The situation's very fluid, and the arrival of the article of impeachment, in many ways, makes that more complicated. So as I mentioned, I am flummoxed by people who look at what occurred on January 6th and say that it wasn't incited by Trump, that it wasn't an attempted coup. I think that you have to really twist things and ignore a whole lot of shit to arrive at that point of view. But here is the esteemed Professor Mark Crispin Miller. He writes in the prologue to a post that I'll detail in a second. He says, while the right apparently believes that their side has never stolen an election when in fact they've stolen contest after contest, the left is just as mindlessly convinced that there's no evidence that this time around their side stole the White House and, he says, the Senate. Now, Mark, putting aside the issues of the White House, if they had stolen the Senate, wouldn't they have done a hell of a much better job? He continues, their claim that there's no evidence of theft for Biden-Harris is every bit as false as it was back when the Republicans were spinning it in favor of Bush-Cheney. I flatly disagree with that. You have to really, really scratch deep to compare the efforts by Republicans this time to portray the election as rigged and what happened in 2004 in a single state in Ohio. And the idea that the Democrats are capable of pulling off a multi-state conspiracy to rig the machines, to count the votes in fractions more for Biden than for Trump, to use mail-in voting as some underhanded scheme, I just find that fatuous. And I respect Professor Miller. He and I had many great conversations in general agreement about the Republican heists in 2000 and 2004. And I can't explain how he arrives where he is today. He goes on to say here, it's just as false as their portrayal of the fracas in the Capitol as an attempted coup, an insurrection, a violent assault on the great citadel of our democracy by a Putin-financed fascist army. Well, you know I don't agree with the Putin part. He continues, the evidence that occurrence was a psyop managed to provide the pretext for the ongoing crackdown on political and intellectual dissent is wholly sound, he says, with ever more of it emerging, though ever fewer of us can know it, as censorship intensifies online. So he uses that to introduce a piece by Paul Craig Roberts. And Roberts embraces both of the points that Miller raised, that there was no violent assault on the Capitol and that there is abundant evidence of election fraud. And Roberts uses sweeping language, calling Trump's rally massive. It was not. He repeatedly refers to the media as prostitutes, and he's entitled to show his contempt, but I find that rather juvenile. He says the evidence will show enormous fraud in the swing states where the election was stolen. Regardless of the evidence, everyone suspects Biden is going to be found the winner because that's what the establishment demands, and that they enforce it with media, Antifa, and BLM as threats to be unleashed and campaign contributions to cut off. Wow. I'm sorry, I consider that divorced from reality. And when he talks about the events of January 6th, he totally ignores the whole preamble of Trump using his mob rallies to groom people for violence and promoting law and order against those who are legitimate protesters, while carving out huge exemptions for his people, those who he loves so much, who he sent home after the bungled attempt to, force Mike Pence to flip and use the ritual approval of the Electoral College vote to pronounce Trump the winner? I mean, it is so far from reality. And the language that Paul Craig Roberts uses here doesn't match my knowledge and the things that I clearly saw, and not just on corporate-controlled media, from the days of the day of January 6th. So I can't explain these. I reach for words here because Paul Craig Roberts has done a lot of great critical commentary and reporting. But in this case, I simply can't buy it. I also want to take a moment here to talk about the militia groups who were represented in the mob on Capitol Hill on January 6th, and the Proud Boys who were on duty that day, having stood down and stood by, waiting for Trump's order. They've now turned on the guy that they called their emperor just a couple of months ago. Members of the Proud Boys call Trump a shill, extraordinarily weak. Now that he has left office, they believe he surrendered and failed to do his patriotic duty. And it's very hard to separate these armed white supremacist militia groups from the QAnon crowd. Now I want to take a second here to share a story, because I've heard a lot of reports of people being censored on Facebook. I've also heard Facebook proudly announce that it has purged all QAnon comments from its platform, and that it also doesn't permit people to post lies about the election. Well, the night before the inauguration, I was floored because in my news feed there were multiple posts from a right-wing nut whose name he uses the name Fredo Liberty. And so I decided to try Facebook's reporting system. And I made reports on 3 of his posts. One which flatly stated the election was rigged, and then this one. Quote, I believe tomorrow morning Trump will address the nation aboard Air Force One, then videos will drop and loop for 72 hours while the bad people are going to be arrested. Perfect time. They're all in D.C. getting dressed and ready when the boom happens. Now, this is clearly part of the QAnon storm. And it is amazing to see this guy, and I don't know who Fredo Liberty is. I don't even know how he landed as a friend of mine in Facebook. So I reported his posts, and Facebook's robots did respond. The first response came in about an hour, and then another one at 75 minutes, and the third at about 90 minutes. And in both cases, they assured me that they understood why I was offended by these posts. They're very sorry for that. But they said that Fredo did not violate their community standards, when it's obvious that these violate what Facebook has publicly proclaimed are the new rules for playing on Zuckerberg's sandbox. The flip side of that, my friend Ford Green serves on our local town council. He got the council to pass a resolution supporting the article of impeachment. He posted that on Facebook along with some poster art about a pro-impeachment rally, and the robots at Facebook took it down. He complained. They reposted it. And then, without explanation, they took it down again 3 days later. whatever the standards are at Facebook, they are not transparent. They are not, enforced in a consistent way. They are arbitrary, and they are capricious. Now, all of this activity, including what I deplore, including the, overnight takedown of Parler by big tech companies that closed ranks and blocked access to the app in the app stores at Apple and Google, and then Amazon stopped hosting the Parler platform. This was without due process, and while I never patronized Parler, I only have accounts of people posting ridiculous stuff there. I support their right to speak up to the point of incitement or, violation of obvious rules of speech. And this has led Glenn Greenwald to sound warnings that I do take seriously. But I've linked to Glenn's piece entitled "The New Domestic War on Terror is Coming." And I do think that it's hyperbolic and alarmist. Now, it could turn out in a month or two that I'm flat wrong about this. But we haven't seen a shred of legislation proposed to support the fears that Greenwald is promoting. And until that time, I will await a further comment. I've linked to Greenwald's article so you can read it for yourselves. It's in the show file for this podcast at peterbcollins.com. So we were all holding our breath, waiting to see who Trump would pardon. And on late advice, he didn't pardon himself. He didn't pardon his kids. But he did pardon a bunch of corrupt Republicans, including Randy Cunningham, the former congressman from San Diego, who had his own bribe menu in his congressional office. He was convicted. And I believe he was succeeded by Hunter. What's that guy's name? Not Hunter Biden. Duncan Hunter. That's Duncan Hunter Jr., who was deeply corrupt, convicted. He got a pardon from Trump. Robin Hayes, a former Republican member of Congress and chairman of the North Carolina Republican Party, pleaded guilty to lying to FBI agents in a bribe scheme. He got his sentence pardoned. I thought maybe it was a commutation, but it looks like a pardon. And a token Democrat on the list, Kwame Kilpatrick, who ravaged City Hall in Detroit. And because Kilpatrick is black, I think that pardoning him has ended a lot of support for Trump among his white MAGA followers in the state of Michigan. There's a lot of ill will toward Kilpatrick. And once you get beyond the racist part of it, it's pretty well deserved. Now, he'd already pardoned Manafort. Apparently Paul Manafort, the campaign manager, was in touch with Trump, persuaded him not to pardon Rick Gates, who had been Manafort's former number 2, because Gates had cooperated with the Mueller investigation. Trump also pardoned Paul Erickson, who was a love interest of Maria Butina, who was falsely accused of being a Russian spy. And Erickson was convicted for his own crimes. I don't understand the rationale there. But then there's, of course, Elliot Broido, the bagman for Trump. He raised tens of millions of dollars for Trump's inaugural committee, and we still don't know where all the money went. Chris Collins, a former Republican House member who endorsed Trump. Insider trading, boom, pardon. Steve Stockman of Texas, convicted of fraud and money laundering. He got clemency. And the list goes on and on. There were some actual qualified people who got a pardon from Trump. They put that in there like parsley. And there is lingering anger over a group of people convicted of Medicare fraud who all got get-out-of-jail-free cards from Trump, including the old buddy of corrupt New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez, the Democrat who continues to serve. But his pal, Solomon Melgen, he fleeced the government for $42 million. And he greased Menendez with trips to the Dominican Republic, and there were hints that girls were involved for the senator. Why would Trump release a crony of Bob Menendez? I don't get it. And I've also linked to an article that I encourage my Catholic listeners to read, written by my friend Tom Reese at the Religion News Service. And on Inauguration Day, the Catholic bishops issued a statement. And because Joe Biden is a Catholic, the statement started off kind of warm and fuzzy. And Pope Francis, he issued a message to Biden that didn't mention any areas of disagreement. But in my view, the Catholic bishops were so deeply complicit with Trump in his high crimes and his low crimes, only because he pandered to them over ending abortion rights and put Amy Barrett, on the Supreme Court. Well, a lot of the bishops want to continue to be political operators. The leader of the U.S. Conference of Bishops, Jose Gomez, Archbishop of L.A., he declared that bishops are not partisan players in our nation's politics. But then his statement was basically contradicted later in the same release, where the conference president stated, "Our new president has pledged to pursue certain policies that would advance moral evils and threaten human life and dignity in the areas of abortion, contraception, marriage, and gender. Of deep concern is the liberty of the church and the freedom of believers to live according to their consciences." Well, that's the same bullshit that they use to rationalize their support for Trump. And it is deeply shameful and embarrassing. And as I wrap up this special podcast, and I don't predict that I'll have another one for you in the near future, I want to pay tribute to my friend Libby Sherwood. Her formal name was Libus. Her father, Ukrainian. Her mother, Czechoslovakian. The parents immigrated to the U.S. They lived in Chicago, where Libby grew up. And I met Libby about 5 years ago when she put up a notice on Nextdoor asking for help taking care of her beloved dog, Bodie. And Bodie spent many days here at the secret studio while Libby, in her mid-80s, scrambled to make ends meet by driving for Uber. Libby was a proud and resourceful woman, very independent. She was married once and divorced in 1970. She has 2 adult sons, both schizophrenic, who live on the streets and battle addiction. Her life was not easy, but she was incredibly positive, persistent, charming, a 5-foot, 90-pound package like RBG of determination and grit. And I learned around Thanksgiving that Libby had terminal cancer, which came from exposure to asbestos, mesothelioma. And her last days weren't pretty. I visited her every day and gave Bodie a walk, checking in on her, helping her with her oxygen. Every day when I left, I said, "Libby, keep breathing." And she did, until last Thursday, when she died in hospice. Her last days were pain-free in hospice, but the week before that was a real struggle. I had several heart-to-heart talks with Libby, and she proudly said, "Peter, I'm not afraid to die, but I don't want to suffer." Libby went out on her own terms. and I honor her today. I'll also let you know that there was nobody else to serve as her executor, and so I have stepped into that role, and it's one of the reasons I probably won't have time to do any podcasting in the near future. But Libby Sherwood made a real impact on me, and I hope that sharing her story will have an impact on you. Thanks for listening to this special edition podcast from peterbcollins.com. Happy trails.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.